African American Soldiers from the American Revolutionary War to the Spanish-American War by Corey Alexis and Zach.
This is going in front of all the people.
Wars from Revolutionary War to the Spanish-American War include the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, and the Spanish-American War. The Revolutionary War was when the colonies became free from Britain and became the United States. England's King George III imposed taxes on the colonies to pay for what England lost during the 7 Years' War. This led to citizens getting angry with this, and they protested and called for independence from English rule. George Washington, in the beginning, banned black soldiers from fighting in the war, but British leader Lord Dunmore promised freedom to those enslaved that fought for Britain against the Americans. Shortly after this, Washington changed his mind and allowed African Americans to fight on the American side. The Revolutionary War led to the Declaration of Independence being drafted. African American soldiers in the Revolutionary War. During this war, African American soldiers fought on both sides of the war. They were not fighting for a nation, they were fighting for values of freedom. Enslaved African Americans petitioned for their freedom using the language that was used in the Declaration of Independence. James Armistead posted as a runaway slave to get behind British lines and feed information to America. Because of his service to America, he was granted his freedom when the war ended. The War of 1812 stemmed from the French Revolution. It was known as the Second War of Independence. Britain restricted the trade of the U.S. because of the war with France. The war started on the seas. Warships would attack merchant ships. Britain blocked the Atlantic coast so that U.S. ships could not leave trade. Most of these battles happened along the American-Canadian coast. Britain sent invasion armies in 1814, which led them to capturing and burning the White House. But victories at the battles of New Orleans in 1815 and Baltimore in 1814 sent the U.S. over the edge and making them win the war. All of the British soldiers were out of the U.S. African American soldiers in the War of 1812. Most African Americans that served in the War of 1812 were part of the Navy. The British took advantage of slavery and recruited/trained slaves to fight for them. In 1792, the U.S. defined militia soldiers as free, able-bodied white males. But this did not stop cities like New York and Philadelphia to have African American regiments. 1/6 of sailors in the U.S. Navy were of African descent during this war. In New Orleans, they recruited men of color for their militia. Governor William Claiborne wrote to President Madison, and he allowed them to be in the militia. The Mexican-American War. During this war, there was Manifest Destiny, which is the expansion of the United States. They declined to negotiate. Mexico confused its own military by changing hands. 2/5 of its territory was lost, and $15 million from the U.S. was given for damage. Some major people during this war were Zachary Taylor, Winfield Scott, Stephen W. Kearny, and Antonio Lopez.
Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, attempts to recruit African Americans to fill their vacancies in their numbers were made by only a few generals. On May 26, 1861, Union General Benjamin Butler refused to return 3 runaway slaves to their owners, claiming that they were contraband of war. On August 6, 1861, Congress passed the first Confiscation Act, backing up Benjamin Butler's claim. General David Hunter unofficially raised a regiment of runaway slaves in 1862, but was disbanded following President Lincoln's orders. General Benjamin Butler was more successful in September of 1862 when he raised 3 regiments of African American troops, which he commanded in the Battle of Antietam. On September 22, 1862, President Lincoln issues a provisional Emancipation Proclamation. On September 27, 1862, Butler then commissions the 1st Native Guard Regiment formed of free African Americans and runaway slaves. The 1st Native Guard Regiment was reconstituted as the 1st Carolina Colored Regiment. By the end of 1863, 50,000 African Americans had joined the Army. By the war's end, 178,975 had enlisted. General Benjamin Butler was more successful in September of 1862 when he raised 3 regiments of African American troops, which he commanded in the Battle of Antietam. The picture on the left is Martin R. Delaney. In February 1865, he became the U.S. Army's first black major. The picture in the middle is Sergeant William H. Carver. He was the first black serviceman to receive the Medal of Honor for his actions at Fort Wagner. The picture on the right, a member of the 6th Colored Infantry, Sergeant Major Thomas R. Hawkins, received the Medal of Honor for his actions at the Battle of Chaffin's Farm. The picture at the bottom shows the funeral of Andre Caillou, who served with Colonel Robert Shaw in the 54th Massachusetts, in which Caillou, Shaw, and many others lost their lives at Fort Wagner. Black soldiers often got the toughest assignments in the longest guard duty. For instance, they were restricted to building fortifications, growing food, or tending livestock. There was a considerable doubt by many Northerners as to whether African Americans would make good soldiers. The Massachusetts 54th earned recognitions for their bravery at Fort Wagner and paved the way for other African American regiments to participate in battle. Many sons of renowned black leaders enlisted, including Toussaint L'Ouverture Delaney, the son of Major Martin Delaney, and Frederick Douglass's sons, Lewis and Charles. Sojourner Truth also sent her grandson, James Caldwell, to enlist. Black soldiers were always commanded by white officers in battle. This is a quote from General James G. Blunt of the Union Army at the Battle of Honey Springs. In an anonymous battle in the Indian Territory, an African American regiment, the 1st Kansas Infantry, fought a mixed force of Confederate Indians and white Texans in a battle at Honey Springs. In an open field, the African American regiment anchored the center of the Union line. They repulsed a cavalry charge launched by a Confederate force so contemptuous of the blacks that they attacked with damp gunpowder. Anticipating that cold steel would make ex-slaves run. Instead, in the words of General James G. Blunt, commanding the Union Army, Captain M. M. Miller of the 9th Louisiana fought at the Battle of Milken's Bend. Afterwards, he wrote to a friend describing it.
The Spanish-American War was from 1898 to 1899. The Spanish declared war on the U.S. because the U.S. supported Cuba's wish to be independent of Spanish rule. The U.S. battleship Maine killed 260 servicemen. African American soldiers in the Spanish-American War were in conflict between loyalty to their race and loyalty to their country. They were made targets. They tried to win respect for their race. They tried to enhance status at home, and they hoped that the Spanish-American War would open economic opportunities to them. Some major people in the Spanish-American War were William McKinley, George Dewey, Nelson Miles, and the president was Theodore Roosevelt.